Hi there, my name is Nick Holden for MWeb Game Zone, and today we are going to be taking a look at the Call of Duty in our final thoughts and impressions video of the past 2 weekends, where we managed to get our hands on the private beta. For the most part, we enjoyed the game for its traditional core boots on the ground, gun-on-gun gameplay, which kept us wanting to come back for more. But first off, how about we take a look at the new Divisions program? Essentially replacing the old Creator Class or Pick 10 system, the new Divisions program replaces that with a core focus to bring players to a specific gaming role. Each one of the divisions has a specialist weapon that it caters towards. This is a clear indication that Sledgehammer Games want to set up those defined roles and make sure that the players play within those constraints. Those constraints, however, do come at a cost. Since weapon selection is so tightly wound around the Divisions class, it means that certain classes or weapon types get left out of the mold completely. Take for example the Airborne Division, which comes with a silencer which you can attach and detach during combat. No other class in the game is actually allowed to use a silencer. That means that if you're using an assault rifle, a sniper, a shotgun, or pistol, you cannot put a silencer on them. I found that these restrictions almost alienated certain class types and playstyles, which is never a good thing when you want to try and encourage as much diversity of play into your game as possible. Overall, I believe the division system still has a couple of flaws that it needs to work out. There is a couple of outs that Sledgehammer Games still can offer themselves here. I don't think they need to get rid of the system entirely. That being said, I think they can use the trade-offs of the basic training system, which acts as the new perks, as well as the attachments on weapons to be able to develop that trade-off. Moving away from the divisions and taking a closer look at the game modes, the crew from Sledgehammer Games offered us a plethora of respawn game modes, team deathmatch, domination, some good old kill confirmed, as well as a mosh pit playlist for us to be able to partake in. But standing heads and shoulders out in terms of innovation, it was the brand new war game mode that really introduced us to a new way to play Call of Duty. Taking inspiration from game modes such as Hardpoint, Search and Destroy and Safeguard, the new War game mode offered us a brand new way to tackle objective play. One of my favorite parts about the game mode was the fact that it did not show any kill to death ratio, and its only core focus was really trying to achieve the objective. I think Sledgehammer Games have caught onto a real winner when it comes down to the War game mode. I can't wait to see them diversify and change the way that you tackle the objectives as you go along, and I really hope they stick to the core formula but do change up the mechanics in terms of how you take on the operation as you go along. There's a lot to look forward to with the War game mode, and it's something that I think the Call of Duty franchise needs. Moving away from War and into the maps that we got to participate in over the past weekend. Point to Hoc, clearly favoriting your SMG and shotgun playstyles. Long-range engagement players such as your sniper rifles and assault rifles would have to find themselves either trying to get those long lines of sight overlooking the middle of the map or through the side lanes of the map itself. Overall, when it came down to the Point to Hoc close range gameplay, I absolutely loved it. When you stepped into those trenches, you did not know exactly who was around the next corner. I found that FOSS style gameplay really got the heart rate up, but yet there was still enough to offer for the long range engagement players that wanted to use those oversights of the trenches to try pick off players. One disappointing fact was that Capture the Flag was not introduced over the past 2 weekends, and I believe that's where Point to Hoc will really excel. One disappointing fact was that Capture the Flag was not introduced over the past weekend, and I believe, just based on that fly through, that it's going to really stand out as one of the best CTF, that's Capture the Flag game modes, when it comes down to the full release. Moving along to one of the core staple 3 maps that we got to play a lot of over the past 2 weekends at Sardines. The snow-covered map essentially divides itself into 3 lanes, where the middle lane we've seen a lot of sniper rifle gameplay, as well on that far right hand side between the bunker as well as the cabin, and on that left hand side that's essentially the hill gameplay, where we saw a lot of players trying to use that to flank their opposite numbers. Overall, the map, I really enjoyed it for the most part. I found at the beginning I wasn't too much of a fan, but as I started to get into it a little bit more, playing especially Hardpoint, I started to find that it really found its mold, and especially in your objective game modes such as Hardpoint, I found that the rotations were really solid between each one of the points that you managed to grab, and just the way that you could adapt your gameplay to be able to try break the hills, try force your way in towards your opposition was really good. So far I'm very happy with the map overall. I think that it definitely found itself more utilized towards this, the long range engagements. That's your assault rifles. But if you're a short range player, you did manage to find your ways in, and that would mostly be specified through the middle of the map, trying to use those cut-off alleys between both the bunker as well as the cabin to try force your way in. One thing that did slightly frustrate me, however, was the spawns. I found that the spawns constantly pushed you back in one of the two areas of the map, which got a bit frustrating at times. That's something they need to look at in terms of just rotating those for the objective game modes. But for the most part, our Deans did a great job in just what it needed to do, essentially provide a great way to be able to play the respawn game modes. Next up on the list is none other than the Gibraltar map, which I found really tried to focus on that core middle of the map gameplay with the two oversights coupled with the bridge. We found a lot of players doing, or at least trying to post up in those areas to be able to get their kills, as they acted as essentially choke points for, or bottlenecks rather, for players to be able to filter their way through. We did see on the cliff side of the bridge that a lot of players, or should I say the sniper rifle gameplay, took place on that side. As far as objective gameplay goes, the domination and hardpoint both were solid. If anything, once again, I'd point out that the spawns were rather predictable. I found that there were quite a few head glitch spots, meaning to say that there's spots where players can post up and all that you can see is the top of their head and they get a full vision of the area in front of them. And that got a little bit frustrating, especially when you find yourself trapped inside your spawn and a player was sitting in one of those control points. It became exceedingly frustrating to try get out of those areas, so that's maybe just something to have a look at. Overall, I thought Gibraltar played really well once you started to get into the thick of it in terms of the objective game modes, such as the hardpoint. I found that it was really good to see that the middle of the hardpoint was heavily contested and really catered towards your SMG gameplay. Moving swiftly along to our final map, it's none other than Aachen, which did receive a fair amount of criticism. A lot of players taking to the Call of Duty forums to tell Sledgehammer Games that they're not very impressed with the map. That comes down to one key word that a lot of people used in their criticism, saying that it was rather cluttered, both in terms of the space provided for players to be able to try get their kills, as well as the lighting that found a lot of dark corners inside of the map. Of course, with the flame and with the build up of those tight controlled spaces within the buildings, you found it very difficult to try break those areas. I think one of the things that they need to look at is that there are two yellow buses on either side of the streets. Perhaps removing those just to be able to open up the rotations through the middle of the map a little bit more. For the most part, I feel that Aachen is not going to stand out as a respawn game mode, or should I say a map for a respawn game mode, but it's really going to stand out for search and destroy. I believe that the slow styled game type will be much more suited, the more objective pace of making sure that players go towards the bomb site, and that is going to play a little bit better into the hands of the map itself. And for the most part, just taking once again a little bit of an overview of the maps, we saw a lot of very medium to smaller map sizes. I believe Sledgehammer Games has stated themselves that they're going to be opening it up to much bigger maps as well, but for the most part they've done that to cater towards that very fast styled gameplay. Talking about gameplay, that's the next thing that we're going to be able to touch on, and what Sledgehammer have done with Call of Duty World War II is essentially re-establish that core gun-on-gun gameplay. There's no specialists, there's no wall jumping, there's nothing crazy there that is going to essentially completely throw you out of a gunfight. Sometimes in previous Call of Duty titles, especially within the past 3 years, you would just have to sit back and say, you know what, I lost that gunfight just because I didn't have that available to me. In terms of a specialist or whatever that was. Now it's much more rooted in its core traditional boots on the ground gameplay, and for the most part I think it was rather fun. I felt that if anything, that is where they need to be able to stay. I feel that there are certain balancing issues that they need to take a look at, especially when it comes down to what weapon dominance there is. We've seen it throughout these past 2 weekends that SMGs have dominated. That has been likely due to the map size, so that's maybe something I'm going to lean away from being too heavily critical on rather. And one thing that I do want to see from the gameplay when it comes down to internet connectivity, is those 3 connection bars, or at least maybe completely removing that and just doing a ping indicator. Especially for us console players, we want to be able to see what our ping is in connection to the server and what is really optimal. Too many times you don't know if you're losing a gunfight if it's based on your connection or somebody else's connection. It's something that they really need to introduce into the game, and I believe that needs to be something that's on the heads-up display as soon as you're ready to activate it, just so you can get an understanding of, okay, this is where my connection stands at the moment relative to the game. But for the most part, I think the game is going to stand out in its LAN gameplay. That's definitely a good one to look forward to. Then going towards the score streaks, I for the most part love the score streaks. I thought the glide bomb was absolutely fantastic, the way that they've taken that on in terms of replacing what formerly was known as the Predator missile. If anything, I love pretty much 99% of the score streaks at the moment. What I do not like, I think, is the flamethrower. I believe that needs to be removed, potentially not completely removed, but at least the overpowered nature of when you die, you get to use it again, at least until all the ammo runs out. I feel that there's no risk versus reward on that, and I believe if you do pull it out and you are running with it, say if it's for 2 seconds, that if you die during that duration, that it completely gets removed again. But for the most part, that is it for the Call of Duty beta. So based on our final thoughts and impressions, I can't wait to play the game when it comes out at the full release. I think what they have displayed for us is a good taster so far. We can't be too heavily critical because, once again, this is just the beta build, and it's going to be quite tricky to see exactly how they elaborate on this. I want to be able to see more depth in the war game mode as it goes along. I think it's at a great starting point at the moment as far as the multiplayer gameplay goes. I really am looking forward to playing Capture the Flag and Search and Destroy. But for now, ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much for tuning in. This has been your MWeb Game Zone review. I'm Nick Holden, and I'll catch you next time. Cheers.